You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, happy Tuesday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. Welcome to the Intrepid radio program. I'm your host, Scotty Roberts, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And come on over to my YouTube channel. Join the live chat room with the other Intrepids going on right now over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel and check out all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio and all the goodness that is my YouTube channel. And thank you for being here tonight. We're going to continue our series on Native America. And we're going to talk more about Standing Bear and his civil rights trial. And the first thing I want to say is, I was talking to my mother on the phone not long ago today. And she's 78 years old, and she's had heart surgery. And she's not by any means an old, infirmed woman. She looks pretty good. She's kind of 78 is the new 58 for my mom, and so she's doing all right. She runs her own business, and she has for almost 30 years. She does a karaoke business, or karaoke as some people say. And she was doing that up here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area for many years. Then about 12 years ago, she moved down to Yuma, Arizona, and she does that down there as well. And she's taken a hit with this pandemic, especially down in Arizona. And because of all the closings due to the pandemic of the types of establishments where she does karaoke. Now she's got new jobs coming in, and so she's all happy about that. She still does that. She uses masks. She gives people masks. Some people wear them, some don't. She sanitizes her microphones and all of that stuff. So she's safe. But we were talking about this whole mask issue and how there's no consensus from the experts on this. As a matter of fact, the experts we generally listen to, like Fauci, like the CDC, like the WHO, they've all come off and said masks don't really do anything to prevent you from getting or giving a virus. It's more if you get your peace of mind out of wearing a mask, go ahead and wear it. And I'll tell you something, I wear a mask. I'm in that high susceptible, I'm just about 60 years old. I have heart disease. I have diabetes, so I've got like the trifecta of things going against me. And but I'm careful. I want you all to know I'm careful. I hope you're being careful too. I hope we're surviving this. I hope the cold weather coming in the next couple of months, and I say that from a Minnesota, Wisconsin point of view. It starts October-ish. It can start to get a little cool up here. Hopefully we don't see a rise in this and we get a handle on this thing quickly. So it does not govern who we are and what we do. So nature has a way of wiping things out. It's done it for millions of years. Hopefully this is not what wipes out humanity. So let's see. If the COVID doesn't get us, Yellowstone will erupt. And that'll get the rest of us. So just some happy notes for today before we get started. Now, I'm going to recap a little bit yesterday where we were. We're talking about, for more than 3 decades, we mentioned yesterday, the 3 stars, the Indians' name for Crook, 3 stars Crook, had been fighting Indians. And he met with them in councils. He made them promises that he couldn't keep because the government didn't keep up their end. And grudgingly at first, he admitted that there was an admiration for Indian courage. And since the surrenders in 1877, he was beginning to feel a lot of respect and sympathy for his old enemies, the Indians. And the treatment of the Cheyenne at Fort Robinson during the last few weeks had outraged him. And a very unnecessary act of power to insist upon this particular portion of the band going back to their former reservation, he bluntly stated in his official report to Congress. So when Three Fingers Crook went to see the Ponkas in the guardhouse at Fort Omaha, he was appalled by the pitiable conditions of the Indians. He was impressed by Standing Bear's simple statements of why he had come back north, his stoic acceptance of the conditions over which he had lost control. He had no control over what was happening to his life or his tribe's life, and he accepted them. And he said, Standing Bear said to Crook, "I thought God intended for us to live. But I was mistaken. God intends to give the country to the white people, and we are to die. It may be well. It may be well." And Crook was so moved by Standing Bear's statements and by his demeanor and his respectability as a man, and what he saw and he heard, that he promised Standing Bear that he would do all he could to countermand the orders for the return of the Punkahs to the Indian Territory in Oklahoma. And at this time, Crook took action to support his promise. Before he passed on the promises, he fought them, he killed their ponies, he did what he had to do. Now that they are a subjugated people, he's seeing the injustice in some of that, the respectability of these people. And rather than just say, this is what the government says, he made promises, and he was going to do all he could to countermand the orders for the return of the Punkahs to Indian Territory. And he went to see an Omaha newspaper editor. He said, "You know what? Let's take it to the press." And this was the Thomas Henry Tibbies, and he enlisted the power of the press. So while Crook held up orders for transfer to the Punkahs, he held them up, put them, let's just wait. Tibbies spread the story of the Punkahs across the city, through the newspaper, across the state, and by telegraph across the nation. Now, the churches of Omaha in Nebraska sent an appeal to Secretary Schurz, Big Eyes Schurz, but Maha-Ichon Big Eyes didn't bother to even reply. A young Omaha lawyer, John L. Webster, volunteered his services without a fee, and he won, and soon he was supported by the chief attorney of the Union Pacific Railroad, Andrew Poppleton. And the lawyers had to work quickly to build a case for the Punkahs, because Crook is holding up the orders to ship them back to Oklahoma. And so they're racing against time. And any day, Crook would receive orders from Washington compelling him to start the Indians southward, and then nothing could be done for them. Now, by the way, and I mentioned this yesterday, I think Three Fingers Crook, I think that he's doing a very courageous thing here, because most people who stood for Indians' rights were ostracized, they were demoted, they were taken out of their positions by the military and by the government. So all efforts were bent toward obtaining the cooperation of Judge Elmer S. Dundee, a rugged frontiersman. He had four main interests in life: good literature, horses, hunting, and the administration of justice. And it so happened that Dundee was away on a bear hunt when the Punkah supporters spent several anxious hours before messengers could find and bring the judge back to Omaha. With Crook's tacit agreement, Judge Dundee issued a writ of habeas corpus upon the general, requiring him to bring the Punkah prisoners into court and show by what authority he held them. This was a strategy now that they're using. Crook obeyed the writ by presenting his military orders from Washington, and the district attorney for the United States appeared before the judge to deny the Punkahs' right to writ on the ground that Indians were, quote, not persons within the meaning of the law. This is the district attorney of the United States came in and appeared in court on this. Indians have no rights by the Constitution and under the law of the United States because they're not citizens. Now, this is different, by the way. You hear this argument that's brought up for immigrants coming into the country, illegal immigrants. Some want to, in political power, want to grant them all the rights of citizenship. Well, they don't deserve those rights. They're not citizens of this country. The difference with the Native Americans, they were already here. We drove them off their land. We made promises from the government to sustain them by taking their land, putting them on reservations. It's a totally different situation. So, this is where we left off last night. Thus began, on April 18th, 1879, the now almost forgotten civil rights case of Standing Bear versus Crook. And the Ponca's lawyers, Webster and Poppleton, argued that an Indian was as much a person as any white man could avail himself of the rights of freedom guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States. They were equal, they were people, even though they were not technically citizens of the United States. And now, Standing Bear against Crook, it wasn't that they were an adversary of Crook, he was named, this was the strategy to hold up their transfer to send them back to Oklahoma, south to Oklahoma, to the Indian Territory. So when the United States Attorney stated that Standing Bear and his people were subject to the rules and the regulations which the government made for tribal Indians, Webster and Poppleton replied that Standing Bear and any other Indian had the right to separate themselves from their tribes and live under the protection of the United States laws like any other citizen of the United States. This was the argument that they presented. And so the climax of the case came when Standing Bear was given permission to speak for his people. This isn't the official civil rights trial of Standing Bear. Now, here's what he said. He said, "I am now with the soldiers and officers. I want to go back to my old place north. I want to save myself and my tribe. My brothers, it seems to me as if I stood in front of a great prairie fire. I would take up my children and run to save their lives. Or if I stood on the bank of an overflowing river, I would take my people and fly to higher ground. Oh, my brothers, the Almighty looks down on me and knows what I am. He hears my words." This isn't, I'm sorry, I get emotional, and this is just the passion of this. Hits me in the heart, and this is good. This is stirring. This is inspirational. He said, "I would take my people and fly to higher ground. Oh, brothers, the Almighty looks down on me, and He knows what I am. He hears my words." And he says, "May the Almighty send a good spirit to brood over you, my brothers, to move you to help me. If a white man had land and someone would swindle him, that man would try to get it back, and you wouldn't blame him. Look on me, take pity on me, and help me save the lives of the women and children. My brothers, a power which I cannot resist crowds me down to the ground. I need help. I have done." And this is recorded in Nebraska, The Land and the People, written by Addison Sheldon in 1931. You can look these words up. This is part of the transcripts of the trial. Now, Judge Dundee ruled that an Indian was a, quote, person, end quote. We actually had to have a ruling on this. An Indian is a person within the meaning of Habeas Corpus Act, and that the right of expatriation was a natural, inherent, and inalienable right of the Indian as well as the white race, and that in time of peace, no authority, civil or military, existed for transporting Indians from one section of the country to the other without the consent of the Indians, or to confine them to any particular reservation against their will. They are people. And when our Constitution says, "We the people," and when it talks about we're all, sorry, I almost pulled a Biden, the thing. I sometimes mix up the preamble of the Constitution with the Declaration of Independence, but I do that in my head. But that all men are created equal. Men, meaning humans, are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is a right. And the judge ruled the Indians are people too, and they have these rights. They fall under our Constitution in that sense. I have never been called upon to hear or decide a case that appealed so strongly to my sympathy, Judge Dundee said. The Poncas are amongst the most peaceable and friendly of all the Indian tribes. If they could be removed to Indian territory by force and kept there in some way, I can see no good reason why they might not be taken and kept by force in the penitentiary at Lincoln or Leavenworth or Jefferson City, or any other place with which the commander of the forces might, in his judgment, see proper to designate. I cannot think that any such arbitrary authority exists in this country. And this is part of the court. This is his decision. And you can find this in U.S. versus Crook. Go look that up, U.S. versus Crook. And when Judge Dundee concluded the proceedings by ordering Standing Bear and his Ponca band released from custody, the audience in the courtroom rose to its feet. And according to a newspaper reporter, such a shout went up as was never heard in a courtroom. General Crook was the first to reach Standing Bear to congratulate him. And remember, this is the case Standing Bear against Crook. And this, you can find that this actually happened. This was written about by Grant Foreman in The Last Trek of the Indians, Chicago University Press, 1946. So, at first, the United States District Attorney considered appealing the decision, but after studying Judge Dundee's written opinion, a brilliant essay on human rights, he made no more appeal to the Supreme Court. The United States government assigning Standing Bear and his band a few hundred acres of unclaimed land near the mouth of the Niobrara, and they were back home again in their own land. Now, as soon as the surviving 533 Poncas in Indian Territory learned of this astonishing turn of events, most of them began preparations to join their relatives in Nebraska. The Indian Bureau, however, was not sympathetic to them. Though its agents, the Bureau informed the Ponca chiefs that only the Great Council in Washington could decide if and when the tribe might return, the bureaucrats and politicians, the Indian Ring, recognized Judge Dundee's decision as a strong threat to the reservation system. It would endanger the small army of entrepreneurs who were making fortunes, funneling bad food, shoddy blankets, and poisonous whiskey to the thousands of Indians trapped on the reservations. So here's where you see, folks, you know me. You know my politics by now. You know I am a conservative. I have said I am a small c conservative with libertarian bents. I'm a constitutionalist. And above all of that, you could actually call me a Jeffersonian liberal in my stance, which is probably about as conservative as you can get. And while I stand for what some people think the conservatives are, the compassionless lot in politics, they are not. I think conservatives stand more for the rights of the individual to do what the individual needs, to choose for himself, than do those who are not. And so I look at this and I'm in full agreement with what Judge Dundee did. This is why I stand for Native American rights in this country. Now, lest it be, Delaney over in our chat room had suggested the other day that wouldn't it be interesting if we could see tribal governments on the reservations have their full authority as leaders in this country? What if the reservations did become, they are sovereign nations under the auspices of the United States. What if the auspices of the United States vanished and they became their own nations within our nation? That would break up the United States as we know it. I don't think we could make that workable in our current situation, sad to say. But there are rights that they were guaranteed that they should be able to enjoy just like any other citizen of the United States. This is where I say, and I draw the line, I look at immigration, and I say because you've come over illegally into the United States doesn't mean that you have the rights of the citizens of the United States. You do have rights that are guaranteed by our Constitution that says that you are treated as a human being. Now, some people might argue those cases when it comes to immigration. Well, it's not humane to send them back where they came from or deport them or whatever. I would disagree, and there's a lot of minutiae. We could spend weeks discussing immigration on this show, which we aren't going to do, at least not now. The Native Americans, back in the 1870s when this case took place, though, it was set a precedent that they have the right as an individual to choose where they want to live, where they want to be. The government cannot, by force, take somebody who is a human being, endowed by their Creator with uncertain, unalienable rights. I agree with this. But now you've got the Indian ring, those who were making fortunes off of the reservation system. It's like our prison system today, another topic we could spend a lot of time on. The reservation system ended up being so enforced because it profited people and people who supported certain legislators in government, people who bought votes, people who, you know the types that are out there. I am all for free enterprise. I am all for entrepreneurship. I am not for those things when they exploit people, which is exactly what the Indian ring was doing. They were making money and vast fortunes off of abusing the Indians on the reservation system. And they feared it would cause a breakup of the territorial reservation system because of what Judge Dundee had ruled. Now, at the same time, oh, and by the way, that Indian ring, the concerns about theirs, it's part of the U.S. Secretary of the Interior report in 1880, the next year. Now, at the same time, William H. Whiteman, who headed the lucrative Ponca Agency, tried to discredit Standing Bear's band by describing them as certain renegade members of the tribe. And then he wrote in glowing terms of his considerable expenditures for materials and tools to develop the reservation in Indian Territory. Although Whiteman made no mention of the discontent prevalent among the Poncas, their constant petitions to return to their homeland, or of his feud with Big Snake, who we'll talk about a little bit when we come back, nor of Whiteman's ties to the Indian ring. So, folks, we're at the end of our first segment. You guys all sit tight through this audio version, the radio station's ad breaks, and you sit tight, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, gang, thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts, and you are back for the second segment of tonight's show of the Intrepid radio program. My show. I'm your host, Scotty Roberts. You're right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com to find the audio version that transmits out on radio and all the different networks. And you can come and listen to the show there. Find out all the places you can hear this show and all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. You can also come over and join the live chat room of Intrepheads going on right now, a feisty bunch, a fiery bunch of people that actually have started really caring about each other. We have a good audience, folks. Come on over, join the chat room, and listen to this show and watch the video simulcast on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button. And now we're talking about how Standing Bear, one of the chiefs of the Punkas, won his case in court before Judge Dundee, and how this set a precedent that a Native American cannot be forced to live on a reservation because he, under the terms of our Constitution, even though he is technically not a citizen of the United States, our Constitution guaranteed that all men are created equal and have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that if Standing Bear and his people wanted to move back home to their lands, they have the right to do that as human beings. And we should recognize them. And since the United States subjugated them, they are technically citizens of the United States. And we're seeing how the Indian ring is really against this. They're going to start creating problems because this is creating problems for their big, deep pocket. What's the word I'm looking for? Their money making with the reservation system, using substandard food, substandard clothing and blankets to try to fulfill the treaty rights for the government. So, we're talking about how William Whiteman now, he really resisted this. He called Standing Bear and his band renegade members of the tribe. And so they could do what they want. They're renegades. This doesn't apply to the treaty rights with the whole tribe. And he made no mention of the discontent prevalent among the Punkas, and or of his feud with Big Snake. Now, Big Snake was Standing Bear's brother, a giant with hands like hams. He had shoulders as big as a buffalo, they said. And like many huge men, Big Snake was quiet and gentle of manner. The Punkas called him Peacemaker. And when he saw that White Eagle and the other head men were being intimidated by Agent Whiteman, he decided to take action on his own. After all, he was the brother of Standing Bear, the Ponca who had won freedom for his people. You know what the Native Americans now are seeing? After the warring and the battling and so on, through the last couple of decades especially, they're starting to see the white man's system. Maybe that will work for us. Maybe we can go to court instead of pulling out our Matonkahe and smashing his brains in. So, to fight for our freedom. So, determined to, and I say that a little tongue-in-cheek, folks. I don't mean that as anything other than than a way that the Native American are saying, look, we can use your own system to fight against you. We don't have to go to war. And so, determined to test the new law, Big Snake requested permission to leave the reservation and go north to join his brother. And as he expected, permission to leave was refused by Agent Whiteman. So Big Snake's next move was not to, and by the way, if you're hearing shouting, that's my wonderful little children in the background, outside the studio, shouting and making all kinds of noise. So that's what they do. That's what children are for. I can't take a digit or a limb, so we'll have to deal with it later. But kids are kids. So, as expected, permission to leave was refused by the Agent Whiteman. Big Snake's next move was not to leave Indian Territory, but to travel only 100 miles to the Cheyenne Reservation. With him went 30 other Punkas, making what they believed to be a gentle testing of the law, which said that an Indian was a person and could not be confined to any particular reservation against his will. Now, Whiteman's reaction was that of any entrenched bureaucrat whose authority is being threatened, and probably because of his ties to the Indian ring, some of his pocket money. And so on May 21st of 1879, he telegraphed the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, reporting the defection of Big Snake and his party to the Cheyenne Reservation, and requesting that they be arrested and detained at Fort Reno, quote, until the tribe has recovered from the demoralizing effects of the decision recently made by the United States District Court in Nebraska in the case of Standing Bear, end quote. The demoralizing decision. And this quote, by the way, comes from the 46th U.S. Congress, the third session. It's a Senate executive document that you can look up. And I'm sorry, I am on the radio right now, and I cannot talk to you. So you have to go out and deal with it when I'm done. Yes, you can have a hug first. All right. Thank you. Bye. You're not supposed to come in when I'm broadcasting. Goodbye. No shouting, no screaming, please. Yeah, but one more thing. Shh. Tell me when I'm done.
Another pop.
No, you cannot have another soda.
How about the pop?
Bye. I'm in the middle of a radio show. Sorry, folks. That interruption, my 5-year-old tends to not understand what, after at least 200 times, does not understand. Don't come in during the broadcast, please. Hold it, save it until I'm done. So there you go. And by the way, any of you, if you lived in my house and you were a child, you would not be allowed more than one soda or soda pop per day. My kids don't need the caffeine, although I drink sugar-free caffeine soda. My kids don't need to know that. We don't need them drinking that much. So sorry for that little familial interlude. I like to call this scintillating live radio. So there you go, folks. That's what goes on around these parts. It's the way we roll. So Big Snake, let's get back to him. He's trying to test this law. And now Whiteman was an entrenched bureaucrat, and he did not like this at all. So Big Eyes Schurz agreed to the arrest of Big Snake and his people. But evidently fearing another challenge in the courts, he asked the great warrior Sherman to transport Big Snake and his renegades back to the Ponca reservation as quickly and quietly as possible. So he doesn't want... He already knows. Whiteman knows. Schurz, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, Schurz, the Secretary of the Interior, they all already know they're facing legal challenge on this. So trying to sneak around the law a little bit here. In his usual blunt manner, Sherman telegraphed General Sheridan. General, the only good Indian is a dead Indian, Sheridan. And on May 22nd, this is what he said. Sherman said this to Sheridan. The Honorable Secretary of the Interior requests that the Ponkas arrested and held at Fort Reno in the Indian Territory be sent to the agency of the Ponkas. You may order this to be done. End quote. And then, as if anticipating Sheridan's apprehensions about flying in the face of Judge Dundee's recent decision, Sherman decreed, quote, "The release under writ of habeas corpus of the Ponkas in Nebraska does not apply to any other than that specific case," end quote. Now, that's his quote. He's quoting the law, and he's saying this doesn't set precedent. And this is, by the way, part again of the congressional record. So, for the great warrior Sherman, it was easier to unmake laws than it was for the courts of the law of the land to interpret them. So Sherman just took it upon himself to unmake the law and the precedent set in the case of Standing Bear. And so, Big Snake lost his first test of his brother's victory at law, and he never had a chance to try again. After being brought back to the Ponca agency in The Corn is in Silk Moon, Big Snake was marked for destruction. Agent Whiteman reported to Washington that Big Snake had, quote, "a very demoralizing effect upon the other Indians, extremely sullen and morose," end quote. And in one paragraph, Whiteman charged that Big Snake had reportedly threatened to kill him, and in another complained that the Ponca had never spoken to him since his return. Oh, so there you go. There is some contradiction there. Big Snake threatened to kill him, but he had also in another report said he'd never even talked to him. And so maybe he's trying to make up the lie and say, well, I heard that he said he wanted to kill me. And the agent became so furious that he begged the Commissioner of Indian Affairs to arrest Big Snake and convey him to Fort Reno and there confine him for the remainder of his natural life. No trial. Just go arrest him and give him a life sentence. And this is Whiteman who said this. And this you can find again in the congressional record. So finally, on October 25th of 1879, Whiteman obtained authorization from General Sherman to arrest Big Snake and imprison him in the agency guardhouse. To make the arrest, Whiteman requested a detail of soldiers. 5 days later, Lieutenant Stanton A. Mason and 13 soldiers arrived at the agency. Whiteman told Mason that he would send out notice to the Poncas, ordering those who had money coming to them for special work to report to his office the next day. Big Snake would be among them. And as soon as he entered the office, Mason was to make the arrest. And on Halloween, what would become Halloween, October 31st, Big Snake entered Whiteman's office about noon, and he was told to take a chair. Lieutenant Mason and 8 armed men then surrounded him, Mason informing him that he was under arrest. Big Snake wanted to know why he was being arrested. "What are you arresting me for?" Big Snake asked Mason. And Whiteman spoke up then and said one charge against him was threatening his, Whiteman's, life. Big Snake calmly denied this. "I didn't threaten your life. Never done that." So according to the Post-Trader J.S. Sherburne, Big Snake then stood up, threw off his blanket to show he wasn't armed. Now, Harry Bear's statement, not Harry, H-A-R-R-Y, this is an Indian name, Harry, as in hairy, lots of hair. Harry Bear's statement goes like this. This is a quote. "The officer told Big Snake to come along, to get up and come. Big Snake would not get up. He told the officer he wanted him to tell him what he had done. He said he had killed no one, stolen no horses, that he had done nothing wrong. After Big Snake said that, the officer spoke to the agent, and then told Big Snake he had tried to kill 2 men, and had been pretty mean. Big Snake denied it. So I've never done that. Now, he's being arrested for this. They're not arresting him to take him to court. They're arresting him to take him to prison and lock him up for the rest of his life without a trial because he's an Indian. So Big Snake denied this charge. The agent then told him he had better go and would then learn all about it down there. Big Snake said he hadn't done nothing wrong and that he would die before he would go. Now this is Harry Bear's statement still going on. I then went up to Big Snake and told him this man, the officer, was not going to arrest him for nothing, and that he had better go along, and that perhaps he would come back all right. I coaxed all I could to get him to go, told him that he had a wife and children and to remember them, and to just don't get killed. Big Snake then got up and told me that he did not want to go, and that if they wanted to kill him, they could do it right there. Big Snake was very cool-headed. Then the officer told him to get up, told him that if he did not go, there might something happen. He said there was no use in talking. I came to arrest you and want you to go. The officer went for handcuffs, which a soldier had and brought them in. The officer and a soldier then tried to put them on, but Big Snake pushed them both away. Then the officer spoke to the soldiers, and 4 of them tried to put them on Big Snake, but he pushed them all off. Remember, he's a big guy. One soldier, who had stripes on his arms, also tried to put them on, but Big Snake pushed them all off. They tried several times, all of them, to get a hold of Big Snake and hold him. Big Snake was sitting down when 6 soldiers got hold of him. He raised up and threw them off. Just then, one of the soldiers who was in front of him struck Big Snake in the face with his gun. Another soldier struck him alongside the head with the barrel of his gun. It knocked him back to the wall. He straightened up again. The blood was running down his face. I saw the gun pointed at him and was scared and did not want to see him killed, so I turned away. Then the gun was fired, and Big Snake fell down dead on the floor. So this is Whiteman's doing, all of this. This is also part of the congressional documents. Now, the Interior Department first issued a statement that Standing Bear's brother, Big Snake, is a bad man who had been shot accidentally. God, these people, it defies reason. We know this kind of thing goes on nowadays. We know there's lying. We know that there are things that go on. But this is the official word. Big Snake is a bad man, and he was accidentally shot. And by the way, this quote comes from Tibbies, who wrote in the newspaper there in Oklahoma. The American press, however, growing more sensitive to the treatment of Indians since the Standing Bear case, demanded an investigation in Congress. This time, the military-political reservation complex was operating in the familiar climate of Washington. Nothing at all came of this investigation. Nothing. Nothing happened. The Ponkas of Indian Territory had learned a bitter lesson. The white man's law was a complete illusion. The United States law was a complete illusion. It did not apply to everyone equally, and especially not to the Indians. And so, like the Cheyenne, the diminishing Ponca tribe was split in two. Standing Bear's band was free in the north. He won that case. But all the others were prisoners in the Indian Territory on the reservation. And so while Standing Bear won his case and he became, in a sense, a citizen, he became somebody who had rights as a human being, and won his case and was able to return to his homelands with his people as a result of that case. The United States kept resisting that case. It kept resisting the precedent that had been set in court. And so Standing Bear, a little bit more about him before we're done for tonight. We've got a few minutes left. Before we move on, we're going to talk about the Utes next. His name was Machunense. And it was pronounced Machunense. He was a Ponca chief. He was a Native American civil rights leader who successfully argued in the U.S. District Court in 1879 in Omaha that Native Americans are persons within the meaning of the United States Constitution, and that they have the right of habeas corpus, thus becoming the first Native American judicially granted civil rights under the American law. And his first wife, Zazate Primo, the daughter of Lone Chief, also known as Antoine Primo, mother of Prairie Flower, who died, and Bear Shield, was also a signatory of the 1879 writ that initiated the famous court case. And so we've talked about Standing Bear, we talked about his family, and in this whole case, the Ponca Paramount Chief White Eagle, Standing Bear, and other Ponca leaders met with the U.S. Indian agent, A.J. Carrier, and they signed a document allowing removal to Indian Territory. That's present-day Oklahoma, where we saw just a month ago the U.S. Supreme Court said that the United States needs to keep its word about the treaties there, which comprise more than half of Oklahoma, by the way. It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. And so White Eagle and other Ponca leaders later claimed that because of a mistranslation, he had understood that they were to move to the Omaha Reservation, not to the Indian Territory. So in February of 1877, some of this is recap, 10 Ponca chiefs, including Standing Bear, accompanied Inspector Edward C. Kemble. Remember Kemble? Took them all out on the train to the Indian Territory to view several tracts of land, and after viewing the lands on the Osage Reservation, the Kaw Reservation, the chiefs were unhappy with what they were shown and asked to return home. They were supposed to be taken to see the President of the United States, which is the promise Kemble made to them. And, of course, if you remember, angry at what he called the Ponca chiefs' insubordination, Kemble refused to take them home until they had viewed all the land, and instead 8 of the chiefs decided to return home on foot, because Kemble refused to give them the train ride back. And so they walked 500 miles, if you remember that. So Kemble visited the Quapaw Reservation and selected it as the removal destination, and in April, Kemble headed south to the Quapaw Reservation, near present-day Peoria, Oklahoma, with those Ponca willing to leave. And in May, the remainder of the tribes was forced to move, including Standing Bear and his family. Now, the Ponca arrived in Oklahoma too late to plant crops that year. The government failed to provide them with the farming equipment it had promised. The Indian Ring was responsible for this. In 1878, they moved 150 miles west to the Salt Fork of the Arkansas River, south of present-day Ponca City, Oklahoma. And by spring, nearly a third of the tribe had died due to starvation, malaria, related causes. And Standing Bear's eldest son, Bear Shield, was among the dead. And Standing Bear had promised to bury him in the Niobrara River Valley homeland, so he left to travel north with about 30 followers to bury his son in their homeland. When they reached the Omaha Reservation in Nebraska, they were welcomed as relatives by the tribe there. Word of their arrival in Nebraska soon reached the government, and under orders from the Secretary of the Interior, Carl Schulz, Big Eye Schulz, also directed the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Brigadier General George Crook, had the Ponca arrested for having left the reservation in Indian Territory. And the Army took Standing Bear and the others. I know this is recap, but this is to give you a good idea of what just happened. He took Standing Bear and the others to Fort Omaha, where they were detained. And because Crook he became sympathetic to them, he held up the orders and applied to learn of the conditions they had left. He delayed their return so the Ponca could rest, regain their health, and seek legal redress, which we just covered today. Crook told the Ponca story to Thomas Tibbles, an outspoken advocate of Native American rights who had once served under John Brown. Now, Tibbles was an editor of the Omaha Daily Herald, and he publicized the Ponca's story widely. It went all across the nation. Attorney John Webster, we talked about today, offered his services pro bono, and was joined by Andrew Poppleton, the chief attorney of the Union Pacific Railroad. And they aided Standing Bear, who in April of 1879 sued for a writ of habeas court in the U.S. District Court in Omaha, Nebraska. And acting as interpreter for Standing Bear was Suzette LaFlèche, and an accomplished and educated bilingual Omaha of mixed-race background. The case was called the United States Standing Bear versus Crook. And it was named as the formal Crook was named as the formal defendant because he was holding the Ponca under the color of law. Out. And sorry again for that familial disobedience of my children. I will deal with that in a kind way. I won't cut off any limbs. But as the trial drew to a close, the judge announced that Chief Standing Bear would be allowed to make a speech on his own behalf, and raising his right hand, Standing Bear proceeded to speak, and among his words, which we read today, he said, "That hand is not the color of yours, but if I prick it, the blood will flow, and I shall feel pain," said Standing Bear. Was he quoting Shakespeare? "If you prick me, do I not bleed? And the blood is of the same color as yours. God made me, and I am a man," said Standing Bear. And on May 12, 1879, it was Judge Elmer S. Dundee ruled that an Indian is a person within the meaning of habeas corpus, and he stated that the federal government had failed to show a basis under the law for the Ponca's arrest and captivity. This was a landmark case in its day. It would be as landmark as, say, the way we felt when Roe versus Wade came out back in the 70s. It was a landmark case. And it recognized that an Indian is a person. It's such an absurd thought nowadays, but back then, landmark under the law. And that an Indian is entitled to rights and protection. Quote, "The right of expatriation is as natural, inherent, and inalienable a right, and extends to the Indian as well as to the more fortunate white race." End quote. That was the conclusion of Judge Dundee. Now, years later, blind and in failing health, the attorney Poppleton reflected on his final court plea for Standing Bear, and he said this, "I cannot recall any 2 hours' work of my life with which I felt better satisfied." Now, the Army immediately freed Standing Bear and his followers, and the case gained the attention of Hayes' administration, the president, which provided authority for Standing Bear and some of the tribe to return permanently to the Niobrara Valley in Nebraska. Now, between the fallout of this is between October 1879 and 1883, Standing Bear traveled in the eastern United States and in Europe, speaking about Indian rights in forums sponsored by Indian advocates and former abolitionist Wendell Phillips. Suzette Bright Eyes LaFlèche later married to Henry Tibbles, the journalist, and her brother Francis, who later became an ethnologist with the Smithsonian Institution, accompanied Standing Bear on his speaking tours. The LaFlèche siblings took turns acting as his translator, and Tibbles was also part of the party. And during his lecture tour, Standing Bear won the support of poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and other prominent Americans. And in his later years, after returning from the East, Standing Bear resided at his old home on the Niobrara River. He farmed near 170 other He farmed near 170 other Ponca who had been allowed to resettle there. And in 1893, Standing Bear worked for Buffalo Bill's Wild West show in Chicago, and he visited the World's Columbian Exposition, where he rode the Ferris wheel in his full ceremonial headdress. Imagine the sight of that. And he died in 1908 of oral cancer and was buried on a hill overlooking the site of his birth. Today, the federal government recognizes 2 tribes of the people, the Ponca tribe of Nebraska and the Ponca tribe of Oklahoma. There you have it, folks. Standing Bear became a person. and it's set a precedent. Thanks for being here tonight. We'll be back in 23 hours after this break, and we'll see you here tomorrow night. Have a good night.